Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, coworker tried to get me fired over breast implants, so I pulled a reverse Uno card. You won't let me sleep? Well then I won't let you sleep either. You want eye contact? Okay, sir. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Coworker tried to get me fired over breast implants, so I pulled a reverse Uno card. Years ago now, when I was 24, my mom died of breast cancer, and as both my grandmothers had also died of it, I saw a specialist for a screening. I found out I had some cells in one of my breasts that could have turned cancerous at any given moment. I was told I had a few options. I could have regular screenings every 3 or 4 months until it does develop into cancer. I was told the risk of the cells becoming cancerous was very high due to family history, but it could also potentially never could turn, so I'd just be getting these screenings for no reason. I could get a single mastectomy on the breast with the bad cells, but they'd need to keep an eye on the other one, so I'd still need regular checkups for the other breast. I could get a bilateral mastectomy and remove all of my breast tissue, basically eliminating the risk. I went for the bilateral mastectomy. It was admittedly the most drastic option, but after seeing what cancer did to my mom and grandmothers, I didn't want to risk it. I was warned about scarring but told it should be fairly minor. It wasn't, and I was left with 2 huge pink, jagged scars on either side of my chest, each about 1 inch long and half an inch wide, and it caused me to go into a severe depression, where it got to the stage of me not even leaving my flat because I didn't want people to see me, throwing out my mirrors, and getting physically sick looking at myself. I went to a therapist, who suggested a plastic surgeon. The therapist said they'd never normally do that, but it was clearly something I was struggling with and I might never get over it, and the therapist could see why I struggle with it. Although I'll admit the therapist did send me to ask about scar reduction. The plastic surgeon suggested a cream, a laser, or implants. The cream didn't work, and the laser was both expensive and risky, so I went with the implants. My natural boobs were an F cup, so I went with a slightly smaller DD. Since then my mental health has improved and I feel a lot better about the way I look. My confidence has gone up, as has my self-esteem. I know I shouldn't put so much into my appearance, but I wasn't exaggerating about these scars. Huge, bright pink, jagged, raised, just really awful to look at, and I hated seeing myself, and they are now nicely hidden away and you can barely feel them. In the present day, I'm 28 years old and working in an office. I'm doing a lot better than I was. My coworker, Jill, found out I'd had a boob job, but not about the cancer thing, when myself and my friend from years before the mastectomy were planning a holiday, and she made a joke about me going on a plane with my implants, and Jill overheard. By the end of the day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not why, and half a dozen people confirmed Jill had told them. Over the next few months, Jill made many jokes and comments about my chest to coworkers when I was in earshot, at one point saying I had more plastic than Barbie and calling me fake in 2 ways. I didn't hear this one myself, but a friend in the office told me that Jill had at one point referred to me as a sack of silicone. I didn't know what her problem was exactly, but at one point she mentioned the NHS, so I assumed Jill thought that I'd got my tits done for free on taxpayer money. I'd gotten the mastectomy on NHS, but gone private for therapy and implants. I asked her to stop more than once, but unfortunately the places I'd talked to her were places like the lift and the women's bathroom, where there weren't any cameras, and Jill just kept making comments no matter how often I asked her not to. I wouldn't say it was every single day, but I heard at least 3 comments per week for 3 months. I hit my breaking point when me, Jill and a few other coworkers were having lunch. I referred to something as being shallow and Jill said you'd know all about being shallow while gesturing to my chest. I snapped. I said, do you know why I have these? A few years ago the doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I was advised to get a mastectomy and was left with huge ugly scars on my chest. I went to see a therapist who sent me to a cosmetic surgeon, who advised me to get implants to hide the scars, and I did just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first. And feeling like that was a mic drop moment, I picked up my food and left. For the rest of the day, I had about 1/3 of my office come up to me and offer support, and the rest tell me that Jill was just joking around and I was being a B***tch. I replied that Jill was being a B***tch long before I was. I then got an email from HR saying they wanted to talk to me the following day, and when I called for clarification, they mentioned a hostile work environment. Note, this is apparently an American term and holds little weight in England, but it's what was said over the phone. I knew the person who signed off the email and I'd spoken to. Her name was Debbie, and she was Jill's friend in HR, so I was fairly confident on who had reported me. I realized that if this was already being sent to HR, I needed as much ammunition as possible, so I went about collecting my information. As Debbie had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume she would be the person reviewing the complaint with me, and if that was true, I was fucked. However, I vaguely remembered a section on complaints that was in my contract when I first signed with the company. I flicked through the contract and there was a part in complaints section that said I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook and said basically HR have asked to see me. Do any of you remember Jill insulting me to your face, and are you willing to write and sign something saying what you heard and when? Not everyone was willing to help as Jill is somewhat feared in the office due to her befriending HR and management, but about 20 people were willing to help me. I guessed roughly when I'd asked Jill to stop previously, the 4 asks over the last few months. Some timings were easy to guess as they'd happened on my break or when I'd first arrived at work, and I wrote them all down, along with a rough time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened and a list of names of who was there for the lunchroom confrontation. I got to work slightly early the next morning. I went round everyone who had messaged me, and most of them managed to give me a printed and signed letter. Some didn't manage to write one but NBD. This isn't exact words as there's 16 letters to sum up here, but the gist was: my name is, their name. I work with Jill last name and OP. On, date, at, time, approximate, I spoke with Jill last name, during which she referred to OP as, quoted insult. I felt this was inappropriate as it directly related to OP's appearance and am willing to go on record further to establish that Jill last name has been discussing OP in the workplace in the same manner for 3 months now, causing me discomfort and creating what I feel is a hostile work environment. Signed, their name. I wound up with about 16 letters, all from different people, and one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Jill. Some even had bullet-pointed lists of everything Jill had said to them about me or other people. As it turns out, Jill has issues with a lot of people's appearances. She apparently made comments about one coworker's weight, and something anti-Semitic about a different coworker's nose, all of which were put in these letters. There are about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it's still a decent amount. The letters weren't hugely long, most were only a paragraph, but they had all the necessary information. I was asked to come to HR at 10 a.m. I took the letters from coworkers, the photocopy of the page in my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. I got there and Debbie was the one overseeing the interview. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I immediately turned to the other HR worker that was currently there and said, "So is my meeting with you, then?" Debbie said, "No, you're with me." I replied that this wouldn't sit well with me, as my contract states I have a right to an impartial overseer, and as I said this I took the contract page out of my folder. Debbie read it. I wouldn't let her take the paper when there was a shredder so close by, and said she could be impartial. I replied that I really didn't mean to be a pain, but I had it on good authority that the person on the other end of this complaint is her friend, and my contract does say I'm allowed an impartial overseer. Debbie stomped off to get supervisor. Supervisor asks how I know she can't be impartial, and I tell him that I have it on good authority that the Jill, who was on the other end of this complaint, is a close friend of Debbie. He asked Debbie if this was true, to which she only replied, "I can be impartial." Supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other HR rep to come with him, and the four of us all went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. I was worried I'd annoyed them. Debbie took out the complaint and all three of them went through it with me. Debbie looked homicidal the whole time the interview was happening, as she had clearly anticipated firing me, or at least recommending me being fired. The interview went something like this. It took like over half an hour and they kept asking me the same questions but phrased different ways, so this is a really drastically condensed version. Question: you said outside that you think Jill last name reported you. Why is this? A. Jill has had an issue with me for about 3 months now. Question: why didn't you come to us when you realized Jill had an issue? A. I had no issue with her. Question: what issue does Jill have with you? A. 4 years ago, a specialist identified potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had surgery to remove my breast tissue, thereby removing the cells and the risk. After the surgery, I was left with large scars on my chest. I went to a therapist for low self-esteem and depression. The therapist suggested a plastic surgeon who suggested breast implants to cover my scars. All of this is in my medical history, which you have a copy of in my file and my full permission to review. Jill found out about my breast implants but didn't know about the cancer. Jill had a problem with my breast implants and decided to communicate this problem to our coworkers. Question: why do you feel this is true? A. Here's 16 signed statements, all from different coworkers, all testifying that Jill told the entire office I'd had breast implants on the day she found out and has since made comments about these implants frequently. They have quotes of what Jill said to them about it and rough dates and times. Question: rough dates and times? A. No one knew this would be escalated to such an extent, so no one really took notes as and when it happened. Question: what event or events do you think directly led to this complaint of harassment? A. For me, harassment began when Jill told everyone about my breast implants without my consent, but as to the complaint placed against me, it would probably be what happened at about time yesterday in the lunchroom. Jill made a comment about me being shallow while gesturing to my breasts, and I replied by giving her an abridged version of my relevant medical history and ending with a comment about the importance of getting the full story. There are cameras in the lunchroom, so I'm sure you'll be able to find that conversation. I'll admit I could have handled the situation better, but after 3 months I felt I had to put my foot down. Here's a list of names of people who were also present. There were 6 people at the table, including myself and Jill. One of these people is also in those letters, and has written their account of the conversation and signed it. Question: had you had a conversation with Jill prior to this regarding her comments about you? A. Several, spaced out over the last 3 months. Each time I communicated to her that I felt uncomfortable and upset with these comments she was making and would appreciate it if she were to stop. Question: to your knowledge, was Jill made aware of your former cancer at any point in this time? A. No. It wasn't mentioned in the conversation with my friend she overheard, and I didn't tell her because frankly it's none of her business, and I did not feel the need to detail my medical history to a coworker in order to avoid further sexual harassment. Supervisor stands up and says, "Well, I think we're done here." He shakes my hand and sends me back to my desk saying that I'd hear from them after they reviewed the evidence, letters, CCTV, medical history, and anything they had already, and made a decision on the case. I got back to my desk, pulled up my CV, and prepared to start the job search again. About an hour goes by, then the person who wrote the letter and was there for the lunchroom conversation gets called for a meeting with HR. They come back 10-ish minutes later. The other people who were also there for the lunchroom conversation get called one by one, except Jill. All of them are gone for about 10 minutes, then come back, find a coworker, and say that HR wants to see them. Then the people who wrote letters but weren't there yesterday are also called one by one and are each gone for about 10 minutes each, some longer, some shorter. By about 3:30 it looks like everyone who wrote a letter or was there in the lunchroom has been interviewed. Then, finally, Jill gets called in. She's gone for about 30 minutes and comes back fuming. She glares at me while I work, but I ignore her. For a 30-ish, Jill gets called into HR again. 5 p.m. rolls around, everyone is either leaving or getting ready to leave, when Jill storms back into the office. She glares at me the whole time she packs up her desk. She then starts telling anyone who will listen that I got her fired before shoving her way onto the lift. An email comes in from HR. My case is closed. You won't let me sleep? Well, then I won't let you sleep either. Up until about 3 years ago, I used to live in a small crappy apartment in an apartment complex. Pretty much all the neighbors were nice and considerate towards each other. They understood that noise affects other people and tried to be as silent as possible, didn't turn up the music/TV to 11 and tried not to make much noise in the hallway. Everyone except the neighbor living directly below me. Let's call him Jay, not his real name. Jay was a massive A***** who always slammed every door he closed, turned on his loud washing machine at 2 a.m., always turned up his TV and music up to the maximum and constantly had screaming matches with his girlfriend in the middle of the night. The music was so loud that you could hear it from 3 houses away. Even after the other neighbors and I talked to Jay numerous times, he didn't change. It got so bad that we talked to the landlord, but he was the stereotypical useless landlord, who only ever does anything if the money stops coming in. Months later the police got involved, but they ultimately didn't do much either. Most of my time in that apartment it didn't bother me too much since I sleep with earplugs and I'm a heavy sleeper in general. There was a time though when one terrible incident followed another and my parents went into debt. Since they always did everything they could for my siblings and me, I immediately took a second job and worked minimum 14 hours a day for about a year to help them out. When I got home I needed sleep. My body went into full sleep now. Immediately, mode as soon as I got home. Sometimes I slept 20 minutes, sometimes an hour, on lucky days 3 hours before I got woken up again by that inconsiderate douchebag Jay. When you're that sleep deprived, it's hard to fall back asleep, because you feel so panicky and off all the time. Many more conversations with Jay followed and he promised betterment, but continued to be an A*****hole. That year was hell and I promised myself I'd get revenge for what he did to me and others in that building. I got my revenge and still do. Here's what happened/still happens. When my parents were back on their feet, I quickly found a new apartment. There was a 3-month period between me moving out and the new tenant moving in. On my last day in the apartment, I set up a programmable, solar-powered alarm clock with a large battery. I left it on top of the large wardrobe, right on the edge by the window to make sure it never lost power. I programmed it so that for 3 months it went off at random times in the middle of the night. Sometimes at 1 a.m., sometimes at 2:40 a.m., sometimes at 4 a.m., etc. Sometimes it would beep for 10 minutes straight, sometimes just a few times. The noise from the alarm clock is just piercing enough to wake up Jay, but doesn't bother other neighbors. I checked up on that, because I waited outside the house on a few nights at the program times and checked which lights came on after the alarm clock went off. Sure enough, it was only affecting Jay. Success. The new tenant lives far away with his family, but stays in my old apartment on weekdays for work. He drives home after work on Friday and drives straight to work on Monday. I learned this when he asked me if he could buy some of my old furniture, because he didn't want to invest too much money for a place he's only ever going to sleep in from Monday to Friday. I got so giddy when I heard this. I gladly sold him my old wardrobe and some other stuff and hoped that he'd never look on top of the large wardrobe. There's barely a 10-inch gap between wardrobe and ceiling, and honestly, whoever looks up there. So in addition to the random times I mentioned above, I programmed the alarm clock to only go off at random times on Friday through Sunday after the initial 3 months were over. And sure enough, it still goes off at random days and times every Friday through Sunday nearly 3 years later. I checked. I live a few hours away now, but I still visit my parents and friends in the previous city during the holiday season, birthday parties, etc. Whenever I stay at my parents for those festivities, I get up very early and walk their dog. Guess which route I'm taking? Yes, we walk right by my old place and I make sure to ring Jay's doorbell at 4 a.m. like there's an emergency. Then I casually walk away. It's a long walk, but their dog is absolutely loving it, because there's a huge field near my old place and he gets lots of quality fetch the stick time. My parents knew that year of 14 plus hours a day, 7 days a week with not a whole lot of sleep was hell for me. My dad even showed up one day during that time and had a heart-to-heart talk with Jay about the situation. Jay even apologized, but after a few days he was back to being an **** hole. My dad is still so grateful that we all helped him out that he too sometimes walks the dog early in the morning on that route and yanks the doorbell like all hell has broken loose. Again, their dog is absolutely loving those random days. My dad even confirmed that the alarm is still going off on weekends. This isn't going to continue forever. The alarm clock has a sticker with my number on it. So if Jay ever complains to the new tenant and they find the alarm clock, they can call me. Once Jay apologizes from the heart, it will stop. You want eye contact? Okay, sir. Background: I used to work retail in a DVD/CD store that rhymes with Manatee, Australia. We had computers that we could use to find certain titles/artists in the store if we had it in stock, or we could even order from any of the other 300 plus stores in the country and have it shipped to the store. Many people would use this for older CDs or collector items that were harder to get. One day an older bloke came in asking about a certain smaller 80s rock band that I can't remember. I looked on the computer for him and was able to track down their album names, which of those albums he wanted, located the album in stores around the country and got his details to enter into the computer for when the albums arrived in store so that we could contact him. He thanked me and said that he was so happy that we could get these albums in for him and left the store. Next day I get called into the boss's office because of a customer complaint. It was and is my only ever complaint in any job for the past 9 years of working. He had rang up and complained that while my service was lovely, I didn't make enough eye contact when I was using the computer. Cue malicious compliance. 3 days later he came in because he had another band he wanted to order. Luckily, I was working. As soon as he walked in, I greeted him with the biggest smile and looked him straight in the eyes. When he asked for if we had any of his band in stock, I typed it into the computer while maintaining direct eye contact. It took me about 4 tries to find the right keyboard letters as I wasn't that great at touch typing. He was starting to get annoyed, but he didn't voice it. Then I had to search what store location these albums were at. That took another couple of attempts to type. I turned the computer monitor around to the point it looked like it was going to snap off. I had to move displays from the counter, which took more time, but finally I was able to set it up at such an angle that I could read it off with a quick glance but also still maintain eye contact. At this point he started to squirm and look away, but I was only beginning. Next was his details and taking his deposit, normally $10. It took me a solid 6 attempts to enter his details into the system, as you had to select each box to type in, and that was hard considering I wasn't looking. At this point he had gone rather quiet and was looking at his shoes. When he handed me his money, I still maintained direct eye contact and even dropped it accidentally out of my hand, which then led me to awkwardly slap around on the counter until my hand found it. Wouldn't want to break that eye contact looking for a few coins. After all the typing attempts, it took me an extra 10 minutes to serve him all because I couldn't look at what I was doing. To this day I've seen him a couple of times, but he won't come to my register and he doesn't make eye contact or hides in the aisles until I'm busy with another customer. A shame really, he had such lovely brown eyes. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.